the school. And the kids will bear the blame. And the parents will believe that there's something wrong with the kids. The parents will insist you're not listening to the teacher. You're not doing it the right way. And some parents will be badgered into getting their kids onto Ritalin. Nowadays, they're putting even intelligent kids who can read on Ritalin. They're saying, well, he's too smart. He's bored. Put him on Ritalin. They're now giving kids Ritalin as if it were aspirin. And this is a highly dangerous drug. And the tragedy is that the pity of this is that we know how to teach reading. It's no great mystery. I mean, I do it. Marva Collins does it. You've heard of Marva Collins, the black educator in Chicago who spent 14 years in the public schools of Chicago, became so disgusted and frustrated. She left the public schools, created a private school in her own home at first. Now she's got her own school building. Took little black children who were considered uneducable by the Chicago public schools, and she's turned them into literate human beings with a future. I've known Marva for many years because she's been involved in the Reading Reform Foundation as I am. I have visited her school. How does she do it? Well, she teaches the kids by phonics how to read. And then she emphasizes language. She emphasizes the need to know your language. She goes directly opposite to what the public schools are doing. Well, here in the public schools of Chicago, they're considered the worst in the nation. Illiteracy rate there is not 30%, it's 60%. So you would think that the educators in Chicago would come on bended knee to Marva Collins and beg her, please tell us how you do it. We want excellence. We want to improve. No such thing happens. As a matter of fact, they do just the opposite. They disparage her. They discredit her. They spread nasty rumors about her. They don't want to know how to do it the right way. And that's why we continue to have this horrible problem, this reading problem. So if you put a child in a public school in America, there's a 30% chance that that child will become functionally illiterate. And incidentally, the educators are reforming reading instruction. You know what the latest fad is? It's called whole language. And it's sweeping the country from coast to coast, from Maine to California. California has adopted whole language. This is the new wave of the future, whole language. They said that the Dick and Jane books were a little boring, so now we're going to give the kids real literature. But when you ask them, well, but how are you going to teach them to read? Not what they are reading, but how are you going to teach them to read? They say, well, don't worry about that. I'll tell you what whole language is. It's the look-sing method, dressed up in new clothes. There's an article in the Washington Post describing this new method. Reading method lets pupils guess. Whole language approach riles advocates of phonics. The most controversial aspect of whole language is the de-emphasis on accuracy. Sound familiar? American Reading Council President Julia Palmer, an advocate of the approach, said, it is acceptable if a young child reads the word house for home or substitutes the word pony for horse. It's not very serious because she understands the meaning, said Palmer. Accuracy is not the name of the game. Hear that? This is the latest to come from our brilliant professional educators. Accuracy is not the name of the game. Oh, accuracy may be all right for the Russians and the Japanese and the Germans, but Americans? Forget it. Accuracy is not the name of the game. And we're paying for this. And this is the latest. This is their answer to the literacy problem in America. Can you imagine? Doesn't it make your mind spin to believe that this is their answer with this reading problem? The secretary tells us that we may perish as the nation we know, and this is what they're giving us. How can you have any confidence in American educators? How can you trust them? How can you believe them? And that's not the only risk that these poor kids are up against. I mean, they're going to be lobotomized in the first grade. But there's also the spiritual risk, because now the schools are doing everything in their power to destroy the religious beliefs of the youngsters. How? Through values clarification, situational ethics, sensitivity training, multiculturalism, transcendental meditation, evolution, sex education, death education. Oh, that's the latest. Death education. Now the kids have to write their own obituaries and plan their own funerals and write epitaphs and suicide notes and visit cemeteries and funeral parlors. One mother told me that her daughter actually watched the mortician embalm a corpse. Some kids try out the coffins. They discuss death at great length. Death education. It's interesting that death education was introduced in the schools in the early 1970s, and now it's a permanent part of the curriculum. And we all of a sudden see this incredible increase in teenage suicide. Do you know that in the last 10 years, 50,000 teenagers have committed suicide? And if you ask the educators, why are all these kids committing suicide? We haven't the foggiest idea. We just don't know. And if you ask the psychologists, they say, well, it may be low self-image. So they're killing themselves now because of low self-image. Every youngster has low self-image. I mean, that's nothing new. You don't go around killing yourself because you get acne or whatever it is. Low self-image. Then you find out that some of the kids who are killing themselves are top athletes, beautiful girls. There's this one high school in Carlisle, Iowa, where the top athlete committed suicide, wanted to be laid out in his coffin in the school gymnasium in his jersey, planned his funeral meticulously. Then the girl committed suicide in that school. She was the runner-up to the beauty queen. She wanted to be buried with her Cabbage Patch doll in the coffin. Crazy things are going on. And you ask the educators, we haven't the foggiest. We just don't know. Well, I'll tell you why the kids are committing suicide. Because they're learning two lethal things. They're learning to hate life and to love death. Now, how do you teach a child to hate life? Well, in values clarification, they give the children these lifeboat survival games, or the fallout shelter survival game, in which the child has to decide who is to live and who is to die. Who shall I throw out of the lifeboat? My grandmother or my sister? Who shall I throw out of the? Who shall be thrown out of the fallout shelter? Who is to live and who is to die? And it turns out that they have to choose the ones who are the most socially useful. You see, when you're making such decisions, well, I suppose you have to throw out all ministers and priests. They're the first to go, and the elderly. And what's left is socially useful. Well, a 14-year-old youngster doesn't feel particularly socially useful. And yet he's given the task of deciding who is to live and who is to die. This can be very traumatic for some youngsters. First of all, they say to themselves, gee, mother and father didn't tell me that we practice human sacrifice in the United States. But my teachers are telling me that I'm going to have to be making such decisions when I grow up. And he's right. You know what the teachers are preparing these youngsters for? They're preparing the youngsters for the brave new world, when Social Security will not be able to any longer take care of the elderly. And it will be very selfish for people of over 70 who want to continue living. And somebody's going to have to decide, well, which one shall we put out of their misery? That's the new world of the future. The demographics are very clear. There are going to be too many old people. And the young are going to get tired of supporting them. So you've got to convince them that it's okay, not only for euthanasia and for abortion, but also, to put the elderly on ice floes like the Eskimos do. So these kids get very upset. Now, when a youngster finds out that he's going to have to make such decisions, he says to himself, I don't have the heart to do it. I will never throw my grandmother out of a lifeboat or anybody else out of a lifeboat. And I will prove it. How can he prove it? By throwing himself off, right? Self-sacrifice. So the idea of self-sacrifice, as a means of proving his love, he will kill himself. Because he's convinced that his parents know this. He's convinced that the reason why his parents haven't told him about this is because they wanted to shield him from these horrible thoughts, from this horrible future. But his teachers, well, they're honest. They believe in the truth. So they've told him the truth, and he doesn't like the truth. As a matter of fact, he considers the truth very ugly. He considers life hateful. And then in death education, he's taught, well, death is very friendly. It's the ultimate experience. Death is okay. It's your friend. Come on in. Come on down. And these ideas click in some kids. They click in the brains of 5,000 to 6,000 youngsters every year in America. And that's why we have teenage suicide. So you put your child in the public school, if he manages to learn to read, that would become a suicide, or a Satanist, or a nihilist, devil worshiper, punk rocker, get involved in Dungeons and Dragons. Incidentally, you have to be able to read to get involved in Dungeons and Dragons. It attracts the very intelligent kids. You ought to hear the stories about some of those kids, the suicidal tendencies there. And if your youngster survives death education, well, now there's the moral risk. Because who do the children meet in the public schools today? The sexually active, the drug pushers, the drug users, the users of foul language. You want your child to come out talking like a drunken sailor, put him in a public school. Parents find that out very soon, how easily their children's vocabulary is expanded in the public school. Drugs. Well, I don't have to tell you about the problem. My heavens, we're now in a war on drugs. It's taken us this long to realize that these drug kings want to destroy governments. They want to take over. They want to impose their total control over us. But they have finally come up with the slogan, just say no. It took them 20 years to think that one up. Prior to that, it was, kiddies, make your own decision. We will tell you all about drugs. We'll tell you what this one does, what the other does. We'll give you a whole list. Give you all its pharmaceutical properties. And you make your own decision. And as long as it's your decision, it's okay with us, because we are non-judgmental. We are educators. We are not moralists. So, the drug problem has become so unmanageable that now we have to say no. We've got a war, but the educators are not quite ready to say no to premarital sex. They're telling the kids, hey, kids, we don't want to throw cold water on your party. You just go on doing what you're doing. But do use condoms. I mean, we know there's this horrible plague that may kill off half the human race. But don't you worry, because modern science has come up with the greatest protection you will ever have. It is this little balloon. This will protect you, kiddies. Just use these little balloons and everything will be all right. Just practice safe sex. That's what they're telling the kids. And of course, they're having AIDS education. Kids are being permitted to enter school now with aids. And of course, you're not supposed to know who they are, because the doctors are telling us that, well, that's okay. You know, nothing wrong with, it's not catching, you see. And the morality of the nation has changed. We're very tolerant. We're tolerant of everything and anything. Here's an ad that was a full-page ad in the New York Post, 1987. I made a reduced size of it. It says, "Don't die of embarrassment. Yes, it could be embarrassing to ask a man to wear a condom, especially if you don't know him very well." That's exactly who you need to ask. The man you don't know. A full-page ad in the New York newspaper, American Morality Today. This ad, incidentally, was sponsored by Metropolitan Life Insurance. All of they're teaching kids all about AIDS. They're telling kids, hey, here's a curriculum outline for the teaching of AIDS. And this is what it says. AIDS is a difficult disease to get. You cannot get AIDS by touching or hugging someone, sharing food or drinks. How would you like to share food with somebody who has AIDS? Or riding buses. You cannot get it from toilet seats or sinks or swimming pools or hot tubs. You cannot get it from drinking fountains. You cannot get it from someone coughing or sneezing on you. Of course, that's why doctors wear masks when they're with AIDS patients, because they can't get it, coughing or sneezing. And then it says, even transmission by saliva, kissing, for example, sweat or tears, doesn't happen. Well, that's an outright lie. Because AIDS is transmitted blood to blood, and there are often lesions in the mouth. Don't tell me that if you spend an hour French kissing, you're not going to develop something there. And that blood may not, there are such things as bleeding gums. That's nothing new. But they're telling the kids, hey kids, you can do all the kissing you want as long as you're wearing a condom. They don't tell you where to put it. It's over your head. But that's what we're getting from our wonderful educators. Can you trust them to teach reading? Can you trust them to teach death education? Can you trust them to teach about AIDS? These people are so perverted, it's incredible. And yet they look like perfectly nice people. I know there are good teachers in some of our schools. I know for a fact that there are some good teachers there. I don't know how they put up with it. I guess maybe the school system is now so totally perverse and so totally confused that a few good teachers can get away with it. But they're not spotted by the authorities and thrown out. But if you're depending on your child to be saved by the one or two good teachers he may have, I'd be much more frightened by the ones who are teaching this nonsense. And incidentally, the death educators are very well organized. Do you know that they have a professional organization called ADEC, Association of Deaf Educators and Counselors? And they actually have conventions. How would you like to attend a convention of deaf educators? You know they have conventions? Blood-curdling conventions? In 1986, the president of ADEC, John F. Stevenson, announced that the association had now achieved adolescence and is ready to embark on fresh territory. Fresh territory. He says the association needs to sponsor a public relations, public information campaign. The association needs to become a household name, similar to that enjoyed, for example, by the American Medical Association and the National Education Association. See, they want to become as big as the AMA or the NEA. You see, the death educators have big plans for America. They want to turn America into a death-oriented society. He goes on, visibility gives an organization the opportunity to make its case. It also brings us face to face with our enemies. And that seems to be important in planning strategies. Enemies. The death educators have enemies. Who are their enemies? Their enemy is anyone who is sane. That's who their enemy is. The sane people in America. And then he says, one reason death education apparently has not met with significant resistance may be due to the fact that it is not widely known. How true. Most parents have the faintest idea what's going on in the schools. And their child may be writing an obituary and then come home depressed, and the parents wonder, what's happened to Johnny? Why is he sulking? Why does he seem changed? What's wrong with this kid? Parents don't know what's going on. And then there's the physical risk. You put your child in a public school and you can be assaulted, robbed, beaten up, murdered. That's happened here. A teacher was murdered here in Montana, in Lewiston. What was it, a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, or 13-year-old youngster who was angry at his French teacher because she failed him. So he went to the classroom door one day with his father's revolver, knocked on the door, teacher opened the door, and he shot her right in the face and killed her instantly. The only thing is that he killed the substitute instead of the teacher. Nice substitute, mother of 2 children, just happened to be substituting that day and happened to get in the way of this young man's problem. Killed the teacher. Turned out that he was involved in Dungeons and Dragons. This is the sort of thing that's happening right here in Montana. It didn't happen elsewhere, but these things happen all over the United States. So what are you to do? You put your child, you look at the risks, the academic risk, the spiritual risk, the moral risk, the physical risk. What are you to do? Well, the only solution is to remove the children from the schools. You cannot, knowing this, how can anyone in his right mind put a child in a public school and subject that child to all of these risks? It doesn't make sense. Now, of course, that may entail some sacrifice and some inconvenience, but let's face it, we would not be sitting here today. We would not have the freedoms that we enjoy today if 200 years ago a group of men had not been willing to make the supreme sacrifice and put up with considerable inconvenience. You know, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, they were signing their own death warrants. And many of them suffered. Many of them lost everything. The wonderful thing about those men who created this country was the tremendous concern they had for the future generations. Whenever you read their writings, they're always talking about future generations for posterity. They were not concerned whether or not they lived to enjoy the freedoms that they were going to be fighting for. They wanted future generations to enjoy them. Now, you certainly want your children to enjoy those freedoms as well. The only way they're going to be able to enjoy them is if they get the best education that you can give them, and if you fight this insidious academic plague that is destroying this country. And so you have a decision to make. You can do something because you have control over your own children. That's the one area where you have control. You can deprive the humanists of what they want most. What do the humanists want most from you? They want your children and your money. And if you're giving them both, they're going to win and you're going to lose. So the best way to prevent them from winning is to deprive them of your children and your money. First, your children. You can't deprive them of their money if you're putting your kids in their school. Take back your children, then take back your money. That'll take a little time. You may have to go to courts. You may have to have a class action suit. I don't know. There are many things that can be done, but that's what has to be done. So the Founding Fathers set the example. Now it's up to us. If we want to preserve this country, if we want to give our children, pass on to our children this magnificent heritage of freedom,